Kevin, John, and I we don't go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank all of you for your support of the family, and at this time we're ready to begin our celebration of life service for Jack Lopes. As many of you probably know, there were a lot of fun stories, and Jack had a great sense of humor. We'll be beginning our service today with words of remembrance from his daughter, Diane. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Lopes. I'm the daughter. Cousin Kevin. Thank you for coming. And we are also live streaming, so hello to everyone else on the live stream. So on behalf of myself, my brother John, his wife Lisa, my children Isabel and Ava, thank you all for coming. So I'm going to get up here twice. So the first time, we thought it would be appropriate if you heard directly from Jack. You all know that he was a writer. You all know that he was a jokester. And apparently, years ago, he had written something down that he thought we could use in his obituary or here at his service. We opted for us speaking here rather than publishing this for everyone to see because it may be a little bit not what we want everyone to read. Okay? So I will now proceed in the voice of Jack. As I get older, I've taken to reading the obituary column in the daily newspaper. You get to the point where you have more friends that are dead than alive. What gets me are the redundant statements like, lost his valiant battle with, surrounded by his loving family, goes on to eternal rest, he was embraced by the Lord, etc. What's wrong with the truth? He died broke, which pissed off his widow. Or he left his fortune to his girlfriend, which really pissed off his beloved wife. Or the deceased wasn't even invited to his own funeral. I have always felt that the perfect death would be being shot at age 92 by a jealous husband. I think that would be something strange to put in my obituary, hence why we didn't. So then he goes on to say, me, I want the few people who show up, thank you all, to celebrate my life and not mourn my death. So we are here to celebrate and have fun. I have lived a great life. I've gone from hand-me-down clothes to Brooks Brothers, from potato soup, the Portuguese soup, to filet mignon, gone from hitchhiking to my own Saab. For the younger folks, that is a European vehicle. I have walked the streets of Paris, London, Vienna, Munich, Rome, Budapest, Tel Aviv, and I have walked the streets that Jesus walked in Jerusalem. I've seen poverty of Haiti and Ecuador, and I have traveled the coast to coast in the United States. I was a member of President Reagan's Advisory Council on Small Business and a panelist on the MIT Enterprise Forum. I was quoted in the Harvard Business Review. I've watched a baseball game, the New York Yankees. I know that there's some Yankee fans out there. He watched the baseball game from George Steinbrenner's box. where a bottle of beer and a hot dog was served on a silver tray. And he wrote in his own little handwriting a little note that says, "By the way, the Yankees lost. He. He was a Red Sox fan. My proudest achievement is that my children grew up to be my good friends," which is true. "I would like to say, in parting, some words. What should I say? So long. It's been good to know you. I told you I was sick. Guess where I left the money? And I'm definitely not coming back." But his favorite was, "I can't understand. I felt great this morning." And if you have one of the cards from out there, you'll see that we quoted him because we thought that was best served to quote him on that card. So now that we've heard from Jack, I will transition it over to my brother.
What about what I would say tonight for today? He was the youngest of 4 children born during the Great Depression to parents immigrated from Portugal. And through persistence, he worked his way up as president, CEO, and chairman of the board of Lopes Industries, a company with over 750 employees. That's all true, but we all know he's much more colorful than that. We know my father was known by many nicknames. For instance, he would assume the character of the moon monster as children, and he would go around and entertain the children with that. When I was a kid, I'd have friends coming to the door asking for the moon monster to come out. He was also known by some as Captain Marvel because of his optimism and the fact he always claimed he was in great health. I think probably the most accurate nickname that he had was the Tasmanian Devil. That was the nickname that his co-workers had given to him. And whenever he entered a room, he had quite the presence. He would either have people that would be motivated into action or other people who would take evasive action to get out of his way. One of my personal favorites was Big Fish, just like the movie. My father was known to tell tall tales, and the same story wouldn't be told exactly the same way twice. I encourage you all to go see the movie, but it kind of summed him up. And like my fathers of that generation, a lot of the stories that he would start out with, "I was so poor as a child." And then it would evolve into some type of life lesson that you had to learn from him. And I remember one occasion where my father came to me and said, "You know, we're talking about work." He says, "Yeah, I took cash and we paid down some payables, and then to increase the current ratio to secure long-term debt for the ARC 51 project." And then he said, "What would you have done?" So I thought hard, and I gave him the best answer I could. And I said, "I don't know. I'm 7 years old." So it was funny. His optimism always kind of created his own luck. You know, he put his mind to do it, and he would do it. And then part of it was just happenstance. You know, for instance, in high school, he worked at the Royal Typewriter Company, so he learned how to type. So when he was in the Army, once they learned that he knew how to type, they put him in HQ. He had a 9-to-5, Monday through Friday job, and he had the weekends free to explore Europe and do whatever he wanted. And as we all know, he had a lot of fun with the paperwork there. But he just got lucky that way. Another example of kind of luck, but also kind of his persistence. He had a big break early in his career. When he was working in Lopes Industries, he loaned a couple dozen obsolete radios to the government. Not long thereafter, the government warehouse burned down. So the government reached out to my father and said, "Hey, can you bill us for insurance purposes?" So my father got credit for selling these obsolete radios for full price. The company thought this was a great job he did. He sold them. I don't think he really told them that they loaned them out. and my father was a buyer. He had no business of being on the sales side of it, but he always looked at the big picture. He didn't necessarily stay in his lane, but it kind of worked for him. My father's accomplishments were a testament of like what people can do he had no really concept of what the word failure meant. He wasn't so good at the word shouldn't either. So for instance, on my 17th birthday, my father got me a case of beer. So, and my friend Mike, you're out here somewhere, had mentioned once, he said, yeah, your dad seems more like a friend than a parent. And that's probably true. But I think my father was probably, if he was a friend, he was probably the kind of friend my mother probably wouldn't want me hanging around with. And he had boundless amounts of energy. I remember when he would come up from Florida to visit, he wanted to visit everybody. He was going and doing all the time. And one particular Saturday morning at 7 a.m., I hear my doorbell ringing. And of course, he's waking me up. So I get up, and it sounds like, I mean, I was in my 20s then, so I was probably out good and late the night before. So I come to the door, I open the door, nobody's there. At that very moment, my telephone starts ringing. Well, apparently what my father did, he got impatient, so he went over to a neighbor's house, who we didn't even know, at 7 a.m., woke them up to use their phone. And we let him in. You know, so I stalled them kind of as long, and all of the cousins that are here, I stalled them till at least 8:30. I think we were on our way to Cousin Lori's house or something like that. So I stalled them as long as I could. So anyways, he just had so much energy, and one thing I will say is, to God, my father's coming, and I hope you're rested, because he's going to be looking for a job. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. So, always my #1 supporter. Thank you so much.
Welcome, goddaughter.
The Godfather. So I was preparing and thinking about what I wanted to talk about today in my own words, not what I was reading from Dad. And I remember that about 20 years ago, my dad was telling my brother and I, we haven't talked about this, I don't know if you remember, about 2 books, Jonathan Livingston Seagull and The Peter Principle. And he kept talking about, have you read these, have you read these? And you know, honestly, at that point in my life, I was like, the only thing that I know about seagulls is they shit all over you at the beach. Why do I have to read a book about this? But he was persistent, and so I did read the book. And yesterday, I found a letter that he wrote to us. Don't know if you remember this yet. I'll let you read it later. And I'm not going to read it all, because there's a lot here. But he was very insistent that we read these 2 books. He was all about teaching and all about lessons and learning from his life and wanting to share that with all of us, including all of his nieces and nephews that he loved so very much. And so when I read through this yesterday, I just laughed, because it was like, you know, okay, I was just up there and visiting with you, and now I need to write you a letter to remind you to read those books. So if you haven't read either one of those books, I encourage you to do so. But the Seagull book, if you will, if you have read it, you would know this, but was about pushing your limits. So normal seagulls, they fly just far enough and just fast enough to get their food, and then they go back to shore. Well, Jonathan was the seagull that wanted to learn about flight versus really just about sustenance. Can I go higher? Can I go faster? Can I go further? And all of the flock were like, why are you doing this? And, you know, so on and so forth. So I think that when my dad read this book, and I believe it was probably in the early 70s, that he really saw himself in Jonathan. And to my brother's point, what he said is he didn't know no, or shouldn't, or couldn't, or what have you. So I really think that that hit home for him, and what he took from that, you know, I think carried him forward and continued on his path of doing his own thing, his own way, setting his own goals and his own expectations. So with Jonathan, he did have mentors, and then he had mentees. And my dad did too. And so I think people know that my dad volunteered to help people that were getting small businesses started and so forth. But I'm going to tell 2 stories about life lessons from Jack. These 2 stories, I will tell you, at the time, I did not know that I was being taught a lesson, and I was probably pretty ticked off. So there's lessons, and then there's a common thread that cuts through both of these, because like Dad, there was always more to it than just was at the surface. So the first one, I was about 14, and my dad was teaching me how to drive. And yes, the driving license was 16, but you know, Dad, like, you want to drive the car? Sure. So he would teach me how to drive out when he lived out in Ashford, and you know, I could drive. He had a really long driveway, and then there was some like dirt roads. But he would let me go on, I don't know if it was Route 44 or something out there, I don't know, we'd be driving all over the place. And so one day, I was bored, and he was going to take a nap, and I'm like, no, I don't want to, I want to go drive the car, I want to drive the car. He's like, just take the keys and go drive the car, I'm taking a nap. So he said, just stay on the dirt road and, you know, don't go out on the major throughways. So I drove back and forth and around till I got bored. And I said, all right, I'm, you know, going to the house. So then I go to get the key out of the ignition, and it doesn't come out. And I'm like, there must be a button or something. You know, you're looking around, you're pulling, it's not coming out. And slowly the panic is starting to come over me. Like, you get sweaty and like, oh God, he's going to kill me. I broke the car. So I went to get out of the car. I figured I finally need to go in and tell him that I broke the car. And I got out, and the car rolled into the pine trees, which made it even worse that I really broke the car at this point. And I run in, and I'm like, Dad, you know, and he's like, what the hell? Taking a nap. I said, I broke the car, and he's like, yeah, I go, I can't get the key out, and now it rolled into the pine trees. And he said, okay, the car is where? And I said, in the pine trees. He said, what gear is it in? I'm like, I gear? What are you even talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Go back out there and look what gear it's in. You got to get it in park before you can take the key out. I said, can't you just go out and do it, Dad? I'm really upset right now. I just rolled the car into the pine trees. No, and he was mad that I woke him up from the nap. So I did go out, and I did realize it was in drive, so I did go ahead and put it into park and easily took out the key. So that's one little story. So the next story was actually a couple years before, and I know Nancy, my dear friend Nancy over there, I think we were 12. So my dad had a house on Lake Chaffee out in Ashford. I'm sure I see many people nodding. He loved that house. Boy, that house was a rockin'. There was some big parties there. Some that, you know, nowadays, you know, he would have been arrested. But so we were out, and there was always friends that would come for the weekend. Nancy was a frequent visitor. And there was 4 of us out there that weekend, Nancy and I and 2 others who shall remain nameless. And so we had the canoe, and we went out in the canoe. And so the 4 of us, you know, were paddling and doing our thing. And you remember that song, Rock the Boat, Don't Tip the Boat Over, Rock the Boat? Okay. So I was singing that, and I was rocking the boat with the intention of not tipping it over. And I kept going a little further and a little further until the canoe flipped over. So now we're in the middle of the lake, and we're in the water, and the oars are floating away, and we're trying to flip it over, but, you know, we're treading water because it's over our head. And so Nancy and I are like, all right, what do? Well, we're just going to swim back to the house. So we left the lake and the oars, and we swam back to the house. And we're soaking wet and exhausted. And we go in, and my dad's taking a nap. And I said, Dad, like, we flipped the canoe over. We had to swim back to the house. He goes, where is the canoe now? I said, it's in the middle of the lake. And he's like, well, go get it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't even, I'm exhausted. I'm going to collapse right now. I don't even know how to go get it. Can't you just do it for us, Dad? This is exhausting. We're really upset, please. Like, you know, the crying daughter that would hopefully get the empathy. He said, go get the canoe. And he rolled over. And we thought, so Nancy and I were like problem solving, okay. So my dad had 2 kayaks. So he said, I guess we can get in the kayaks and go out to the middle of the lake. Now, if you have been kayaking, you know, right, how tippy those are. So off we go, 12 years old, just Nancy and I. Thank you, Nancy. You've always been the one that I recruit for my shenanigans. And we went out, and we're out there trying to figure out how do you flip it over, get the water out of it while not tipping over the kayaks. And, oh yeah, where the heck are the oars? And we're trying to find the oars. So we were, you know, making some progress, and then we hear, just flip it over and bring it over here. Like, we had this vision that we were going to drag it all the way back to the house, but he was standing on a point of the shore that was closer to us. And so he knew, like, what are they doing? They're trying to get all the way back there. Just get it to shore. Just get it. So he's yelling, just get it to shore. Really, really, really mad. So we did. We triumphed. And we got it to shore, and we collapsed. And then he said, all right, now carry it back to the house. I was really, really mad. Really mad. And I did that again. Dad, really, you know. So we did end up taking that kayak and lifting it over our heads, and we carried it back as he went back, and he laid back down to take the rest of his nap. So those are two examples, and one would say that the lesson is probably fend for yourself, problem-solving skills, figure it out, use the tools that you have at your availability. But I think the message was never underestimate the power of a good nap. And don't ever wake up Dad. With that, I say thank you. I also want to point out, I want to thank Margaret, who is here, this beautiful lady in the back row. Margaret is one of the staff members at Eagle Point who has been with Dad since he got there. And I hope I won't embarrass you, Margaret, but she was the only one that could keep the man in line. He was trouble, right? You all know he was trouble. And he met his match when he met Margaret. And he introduced her to me as, this is your next stepmother. And I said, Mommy! But in all sincerity, Eagle Point and Suffield House have been a blessing for my brother and I for 4 years. They are amazing and wonderful people because of Margaret and people like her. So we just want to, from my heart, say thank you. Yes, waking up from his nap. And with that, we're going to have open mic now. So I believe maybe there are a person or two. Anyone who'd like to come up, but I think we're starting with Cousin David, who is my bookend.
Isn't David the oldest member of the family out of Jackstown?
Yes, he is. We are bookends. And now we pass the torch of the patriarchy.
Okay, so as the oldest cousin, I had a distinction at one point. I was Jack's favorite nephew. And then Philip was born. So in telling Uncle Jack's stories, the problem isn't finding something to say, it's keeping it under 8 hours. So we were always jealous of you guys because you got to see Uncle Jack all the time. But you weren't the first kids he ever lived with. When I was a year old, my parents were divorced, and Kevin and I went to live with May in the west end of Hartford on 1621 Park Street. And we had my mother, Bunny, Laura, and a teenage Jack. Now I want you to imagine, with what you just heard about Jack, imagine him at 17 and 18 years old. This guy was a character. There was a young lady that he really wanted to go out with, but she refused unless he had somebody that would double date with his girlfriend. So he searched his memory. He couldn't think of anybody that would go out. But he said, I got just the guy for you. You're going to love him. He's cute. So when I was 2, I went on my first date, courtesy. Used to have a lot of fun bedeviling the man. But even as a teenager, he taught me a lot. And later, as we were growing up, particularly in those tough teenage years, it was always a nice refuge to be able to walk across Windsor Locks to Heather Lane or drive nonstop to Boca just to spend time with Jack. He had a way of giving you advice, whether it was professional, personal, anything, without you realizing he'd done it. And 2 days later, something would dawn on you, and you think it was your idea. Pretty good, especially considering all us Lopes relatives are, well, we might be a little stubborn. I don't know. He was a man of much wit, the ability ability to think outside of the box, but not so far outside that he couldn't relate to anything. And it was always a joy spending time with him. So after John called me last 2 weeks ago, I just had this image. For those that don't know, Jack was predeceased by his 3 sisters and his mother. So I had this image of Jack shows up, he wakes up and he's standing in front of St. Peter. And St. Peter said, look in the book and, hey, they're going to let you in. Jack says, they are? So the gates open, and there's Laura and Bunny and Alice, all smiling. And this voice that is simultaneously a grown woman and a little girl yells, Uncle Jack! And Carol launches herself off the fourth step. And the way she always did, May just laughed and shook her head. So, enough for me. Whoever else wants to talk.
You gonna go, Kevin?
No, I can't do any better than that. You gonna tell about the Colonel?
I don't remember the Colonel. So, good afternoon. My name is Carl. I'm one of the Lopes nephews. And my brother David just told you, my mother died when we were very young. So Jack took a very active role in making sure that we were okay. I think my father, who had 4 boys between the age of 5 and 10, was a little lost at the time. And Uncle Jack always stepped in to make sure we were doing okay. Now, one of my youngest memories of my uncle was visiting his mother, our grandmother, who was in a nursing facility, I want to say in Bloomfield, and I believe it's still there. I think I drive by and say, I think that's the place. And I think once, twice a month or so, he would pick us up in his Volkswagen Beetle. He was one of the first people, I think, who had one of these. I don't think it had heater or whatever, you know, was, but I know he asked you to drive when you were 14. If memory serves, we would sit on his lap. I was 5 or 6, and he would say, Carl or John or David, grab the steering wheel. And you'd feel like you were steering, and he'd be working the pedals. The other things I remember about him was that when you went to his house on Heather Lane, he introduced us to Playboy magazine because he was a subscriber, apparently. And this was back when I was 7 or 8, and so he just had it out on the coffee table like it was nothing. And I remember my stepmom at the time, who came into our lives, I think when I was 7, put that down, put that down. Of course, when they weren't around, we'd all sneak a look at the magazine.
Articles.
Yes, it was for the articles. I could barely read at the time, so we used to. The Landolinas didn't learn to read until we were like 12, so we were always just looking at picture books. Now, if memory serves, I could be wrong. Maybe some of my brothers can fill in the story. When Jack was in the Army, him and his buddies created a fake soldier.
Well, there's 2 stories. One was Joey Balsinki.
Joey Balsinki, that's the one I
He
remember.
created a soldier. He, if I remember right, during the first month, he saved somebody from an accident.
Joey did.
Yeah. And
The
then-
non-soldier, the non-person
and then
soldier.
a couple of months later, he saved somebody else. The Jeep rolled over and he gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It got to the point where the general wanted to meet this guy.
Right. He was a squared away soldier. He didn't exist. But like all of you who have spoken, I mean, Jack sort of in a sort of roundabout way, you know, taught us things about life. And when I was going to college, I was always looking for money, always begging, borrowing, stealing, whatever I could to afford a school that I probably shouldn't have been at anyway. But Jack was one of the folks who chipped in a little bit, and we called it a loan, and I believe he asked me to pay back his son. John, did I ever pay you back?
Not that I recall.
Not that you recall, all right. Yeah, put that down, charge that off. So, anyway, just some random memories of Uncle Jack. Thank you.
Kevin, you want to say anything?
Come on, Kevin.
Those guys have done a pretty good job.
Kevin.
They did create, Uncle Jack did create,
Come on, we got, so that way they.
I know, we're on live stream, so we gotta see you.
I can't believe we had to force him to get up there.
Uncle Jack,
Right?
Uncle Jack didn't like Army life. He didn't like the rules, he didn't like the regulations. He thought things that were done stupidly. He created a colonel. And if he didn't like something, he would send a note out to that person with the colonel's signature saying, straighten your ass out or else. So he was using his power of penmanship to get his own way in the Army without anybody else even knowing about it. He created a fictitious character and no one bothered to check up on it. It's just, this is the type of person he was. He saw something happening that wasn't supposed to happen, and he'd get it fixed no matter what. By the way, Joey Balsinki, the hero that didn't exist, had to die. The general wanted to meet him, or somebody up high had wanted to meet him, so they had to kill him off in a fiery Jeep accident. So there's no body, there's no confirmation. So this is Uncle Jack. God bless him. Any other stories, Dave? No? You too should do the same thing.
So, my name is Mark Berkowitz, a good friend of John's, and grew up with Diane, and I've been thinking about what Mr. Lopes, or Lopes, Lopes, right? What Mr. Lopes meant, you know, for my life and my buddies growing up and just being kids. And there are a few things that really strike me about Mr. Lopes. One is, I'll never forget the time John and I went to a Chiefs-Dolphins game in Miami, and I remember walking in, and the way he would greet you, like you were the only person in the world. He was so happy to see you. He had that joy about him, like, you know, you were special, and I'll never forget that. The other experience with Mr. Lopes, and it struck me last night when we were talking, John, yesterday, is that he was sort of like the anti-helicopter parent, right? Yeah, I think he's the reason why there are helicopter parents today. Of who he was. And for those of you who don't know who helicopter parents are, you probably grew up having a helicopter mom. You know, they're the type of people who will do their son's homework, they'll write their college essay for their kid, they'll track them on the phone, see exactly where they are. Well, that wasn't Mr. Lopes. So I had to look up yesterday on the internet what an anti-helicopter parent was. And it's really providing children with chances to develop a sense of self-efficacy. Now, I went to high school in Windsor Locks, so I had to look up self-efficacy, right? You know, for us Windsor Locks high school folks, yeah, I didn't know what that meant. Well, self-efficacy, I can't say it, reflects confidence in the ability to exert control over one's own motivation, behavior, and social environment. What he taught us, and Diane alluded to this somewhat, is that he taught us responsibility, helped us create a sense of independence, who we are, gave us the freedom, gave us a safe space. Did we drink a little bit too much when we were growing up? Yeah, so you know, maybe but we learned how much to drink, and if we got sick, then so be it. You know, did we shoot fireworks off at each other, right, John? But we have our fingers.
How about in the canoe?
That's right, that's what I'm saying, we were shooting fireworks off at each other. And I did have a direct hit on John in the canoe. But we have all our fingers and toes, right? Absolutely. Did he give us the safe space to experiment with relationships, let's just put it that way. And as far as I can tell, I don't think we got anybody pregnant. So, I think all in all, I mean, we've given us that sense of independence, who we are, and growing up. We grew up at a really special time, a really different time. So I will miss those days. But it was special to us, John, and to our friends. And the last thing I want to say is, Mr. Lopez, may your memory always be a blessing.
How you doing? I'm Mike Miller. I've known John and the previous speaker, Mark. I just want to confirm some of the stories that Diane said. Yes, he was the moon monster. I remember those days. I was one of those kids in the neighborhood that he terrorized. And, you know, it was fun going to John's house. We had the swimming pool because we knew that moon monster was coming out at some point. As I got older, he was one of the guys that took us to our, you know, I think my dad took us to our first game, but we went to Shea Stadium a lot with your dad and watched the Mets. I can remember the day before I hurt my knee playing football, and him making sure that I got around there as you were running ahead. I'm hobbling around trying to keep up with you guys, and your dad was acting as if he was mine on that day, and I appreciated that. And as far as that lake and that house there, he invited us one time to come paint his house. Okay. And there again, we get back to where we said, I think you mentioned he could possibly, you know, be arrested for some of this stuff. Well, there we are painting the house. I remember it pouring rain. I think I fell off the roof doing that. And I could see he would just like look, like shake his head, like these, you know. I always compared him to my dad too. My dad, may he rest in peace, a great man. I would say to John, yes, your dad is like a friend to you. My dad, there was a lesson in everything we did. He was always like, hey, yeah. His dad was like one of the gang. And I can remember him always, anytime John did something wrong, now maybe you guys got lessons behind the scenes. Maybe you got that same speech I did. You should park here when I'm driving with my dad, right? And John said, yeah, he did that too. He did. And I'm like, no, I never see it. I never see him. He's not yelling. He's not. So maybe he did a good job of hiding that. The canoe story, the same canoe that Nancy and Diane had difficulties with, Mark mentioned it in his, that we were shooting bottle rockets at one another. John and I were in the canoe. Mr. Lopez rounds up the rest of the guys. They're on the shore. John and I have this tube. We're shooting bottle rockets back at the shore. Mr. Lopez, leading the gang, is shooting bottle rockets back at us. Well, nobody got hit. John, unfortunately, lit ours on fire and, you know, it started exploding in the front of the canoe. So I guess when I think back on it, yes, he was a great, we heard all the great stories about what, you know, what he was at work. Great dad, helping you to learn at 14. I mean, you know, driving, that's good too, but I think more than anything, for me, I saw that he was a great father to them, but also respected them as adults and look at the fine kids that he left here. If that's his legacy, and all of you guys too, I mean, the Landolina family that's here, it was a pleasure to know Mr. Lopez. Oh, I do have one more story. Oscilloscope. Remember the oscilloscope? He brought back this device from work, LaPointe Industries. He stuck it in the garage. John and I thought it was something cool. It was like a robot or, you know, something with a lot of bells. Till this day, I still don't know what an oscilloscope is. So if somebody has that, you can let me know. Mr. Lopez, rest in peace.
because there's been so much conversation about that famous canoe, so if you took one of the cards, you did get Jack's quote, but the other side is a canoe. And when we were picking these cards out, and my brother and I were flipping through the book over here in the room, no, like what speaks to us as Jack, right? You know, there was doves and crosses and all, we're like, no, and then we saw the picture of the canoe. So I think the last story about the canoe was when we went on vacation, and Dad wanted to bring the damn canoe with us. I think we were going to Plymouth, Mass, somewhere that was on the ocean. And we're like, Dad, you know, we have that on the lake, but like really, you're gonna, you know, and he had a sedan. You know, back then nobody had SUVs, right? And so he said he's gonna put the canoe on the top of the car, and we're gonna drive the canoe with us to take it on vacation so that we can go in the ocean and go canoeing. So we hoist the canoe up on the top of the car and bungee it or rope it off or whatever it is. So the point, picture if you will, we're in this sedan, the point of the canoe is like basically hanging over the hood of the car, and we're off on our trip. And nobody had GPS back then, and Dad was certainly not someone to read a map. And we're trying to find our way, and somehow we end up in downtown Providence, and we're driving in circles in downtown Providence with a big ass canoe on the top of the car, and he refuses, you know, to ask directions. So when we finally got there and got the darn canoe off, and you know, he had the brilliant idea of going out into the ocean in the canoe. You know, there are currents in the canoe that are kind of strong. So I'm really surprised that that was a day that we did survive. And I said, can we please leave the damn canoe here? Someone will take it and give it a good life. And he said, absolutely not. The canoe is a part of the family, and the canoe comes home. So back up on the roof of the car it went, and it came back home again. So take with you a photo of a canoe and think of Jack. So thank you all.
Anybody else? Okay, I think this concludes the services, and feel free to mingle amongst yourselves and share any of these stories that you've heard or new ones that may not have been told. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
If anyone hasn't gotten a chance to take one of the prayer cards, they're right outside the front door here. But please, you know, have a chance to socialize and share many more stories of Jack. And thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.
Wow. So how are you today? Very strong.
Remember that? John was in the wedding party. So his dad was my 8-year wedding. Is that right? I'm sorry. Heather. Remember me, Heather? Oh my God, Heather!
What's that? Of course you are starting.
Ready to go back? Yeah, I know that. Yeah.